So, I finished the Nod-Krai Luna 2 Archon Quest a few days ago, and what I experienced compelled me to make this video that you're watching right now. Because, let me tell you, it was peak with a capital P-E-A-N-K. It was so peak, in fact, that if Martin Scorsese himself were to play through it, he'd end up hitting the pose. You know the one. And yes, this is going to be a glazing video, if you couldn't tell by now. So if you're adverse to that kind of content, or for some absurd reason didn't find this quest all that enjoyable, this is your cue to leave. But before you do, please feel free to write an essay in the comments about how much you hated it, and preferably also argue with those that disagree with you after that as well, since that does actually help boost my videos in the algorithm. And for the rest of you, my fellow based 6.1 story enjoyers, feel free to do the complete opposite and give this video a like, and why not also comment about what you found enjoyable about this quest. But enough about that, and let's begin talking about some peak cinema, shall we? Now, where to begin? I guess by starting with a small overview of 6.0. So I personally consider the 6.0 story to be the best beginning act of any Archon Quest in the game, by and large because of it doing an excellent job of establishing the new region, its inhabitants and those that journey alongside us, all whilst still being able to tell a compelling narrative, a narrative that culminates with us having a new foe at our hand, a very strong foe at that. It's the Luna 1's story's ability to lay the foundation as well as it did, that allows for the following, and as of writing this, also most recent story act, to go all gas, no break, from the get-go, so to speak. I mean, not even 5 minutes into the quest, and we already have one of the game's most impressive cutscenes, that manages to instantly establish that we have an urgent mission on our hand, to say the least, if you hadn't already gotten that memo from the ending of the previous quest. A mission that involves us trying to find a way to get rid of an antagonist that we are no match for, even in their severely, and I do wanna stress, severely weakened state. A weakened state that they are slowly recovering from, mind you, meaning that the already large gap in power between us and them is still getting larger, and not in a good way. All whilst our own strongest fighter needs to spend a lot of their strength just on staying alive, on account that the literal world itself ain't fucking with them. So yeah, the sense of urgency is very well established from the get-go, which is very fitting when we consider what we're dealing with. And that urgency does basically manage to remain for the entire 6.1 quest. But it is also in us trying to find a solution to this nigh on impossible task that we get so many answers and confirmations to long unanswered questions and theories. On top of there also being quite a few loose ends that end up finally tied up, which, as the devs have stated, also happens to be one of the main goals with Nod-Krai, to tie many of the game's plotlines together whilst bringing others to the forefront, achieving this by having them appear or be referenced in the Archon Quest itself, the main catalyst of telling the story in the game. But to now zoom in a bit and talk about the characters themselves. One of the more underrated parts of this quest, for lack of a better word, I would say is the character dynamics and banter. Now, I'm of the belief that Genshin has historically always had really solid character writing. I mean, that's literally their entire business model, which, hinges on how compelling or likable their characters are, since, they need to make money from them. But I do feel like Nod-Krai has had a noticeable bump in quality, yet again in this regard, in no small thanks because of the well-executed groundwork laid out in the 6.0 quest for many of them. Be it Flince's subtly mischievous nature, Llama and Nefer's bickering in a kissy friends type of way, Jehoda being the local bum, Columbina being the Archon of rage-baiting, Arlecchino slaying in more ways than one, Varka's dead energy, Santrone being the honored one amongst Tsunderes, and the list goes on. But as far as character writing in Luna Archon Quest 2, the award this time goes to none other than, yeah, you guessed it, Rerir himself. So, Rerir, eh? What a phenomenally written character. Like, genuinely. I know I already said that Genshin has historically had very good character writing, but as far as villains in the Archon Quest go, well, that's another story. granted half of the Archon quests don't even really have a main villain or antagonist. Well, they technically do, but like also not really. I mean, take Natlan for example. The villain of Natlan was literally the Abyss itself, like there wasn't really any specific guy that was like the bad one, if that makes sense. Whilst in Fontaine it was a hungry whale that was hungry and that was about it for him. Well, granted, technically it was more accurately Celestia that was cursing the whole nation. And there was also that one dude that was like, melting people with like the forbidden energy drink liquid. He was certainly a despicable little shite. Though in Sumeru we did actually have a real villain with Azar and Hat Guy. Technically a Dotor as well, but like he was just kinda there. As for Inazuma and Liu and Mondstadt, they did have some, villains, antagonists of the sort. But at the same time, not really. Like sure, they were there, but like, they also kinda weren't. Like Osiles shows up for like 5 seconds. Tartaglia is like a good guy for like 90% of the quest, and then like, we fight him. Raiden is like a good guy now, I guess, and Signora is in an ashtray. But yeah, anyway, you get the point. Genshin's history with compelling villains in their main story quest has always been a weaker part of the game. I wouldn't say a bad part, just a weaker part. And obviously this is not to say that these stories themselves are bad by any means. Far from it, in fact. Sumeru, Fontaine, Outland were all great in my opinion. Mondstadt and Liu were both decent, and Inazuma, we don't talk about Inazuma here. It's a safe space. It's okay. Inazuma can't hurt you anymore. And there are cases of good villains in Genshin's past, like Scaramouche being a good example in my opinion. But none has ever been as compelling as Rerir himself. He is, without a doubt, in my opinion at least, the most compelling villain we've ever had in the game. Period. Be it main story, character story, world quest, side quest, and so on. Rerir is a true villain, a villain that even Saul wouldn't be able to defend.
Hello, and welcome to the Los Pollos Hermanos family. My name is Gustavo, but you can call me Sus.
But at the same time, he's still a very nuanced character, and to a certain degree, I'd even consider him a victim. Now, if my understanding of Rerir is correct, that he was basically an orphan groomed into being an assassin for the king at an early age stands true, I do actually find it to be quite difficult to completely fault him for the heinous acts that he has committed. Well, I would say that at least, until he eventually starts to question his own line of work, that is. The moment he starts to realize that what he is doing is wrong, him still deciding to go through with his work is, in my opinion, inexcusable and what makes him a villain. But at the same time, it sadly makes a lot of sense, and I would be lying if I weren't unsure myself how I would act given if I was placed in Rerir's shoes, and I believe that goes for many of you watching this as well. But what I do think would set most people apart from Rerir is the fact that he did literally nothing to change his situation, wherein most people would at least look for a way out, even if they were to eventually give up in the end. It's this total lack of urgency to address his situation until it eventually starts to affect him as well that makes his situation, in my opinion, go from that of a very nuanced one to one that is quite objectively one of a selfish, pure villain. A point I feel miHoYo themselves wanted to convey as well, since Nefer's little walk through memory lane quite clearly depicts this. Nefer, just like Rerir, was dealt quite a shitty hand at life, but whereas Rerir did fuck all to do anything about his situation, Nefer, on the other hand, worked hard to find a way out of her shitty situation. Not to mention they are literally in, or I guess in Rerir's case were, in the same line of work. Minus, the killing 6-year-olds part for Nefer, that is. Or I certainly hope so, at least. So the parallels are clearly there, and miHoYo wants you to take notice of them. Okay, so time for a minor side tangent. Apparently, a decent amount of people find this part of the Archon Quest to be one of the weaker parts, which I honestly don't understand at all. I mean, we literally get to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. The most obvious one obviously being Nefer's backstory, but on top of that, we are also shown one of the potential side effects which come with using this magical chessboard with quite an impressive power that literally allows the user to look into anyone's past, even that of a sinner. A sinner. And last but certainly not least, also showing the parallels between Rerir and Nefer, and how even with both of them having quite bad starting points, so to speak, the roads they took led them to drastically different places. Okay, but enough about that, so before we move on and take a step back to look at the Khaenri'ah Crimson Moon situation as a whole, let's first summarize Rerir, using the words of none other than Nefer herself.
So that's how the Raker of Solnari was born. A monster created by circumstance is a monster all the same.
Now, if you were to ask me if Genshin Impact would have one of their primary plot points for an Archon Quest, no less, be that of a literal genocide, not even a week before the quest came out, I would be hard-pressed to believe you. Not because Genshin Impact never covers fucked up topics, it does actually do that quite frequently, in fact, but that's mainly inside content and the lore. I don't think there's been something even close to the genocide against the Crimson Moon dynasty, in regard to how messed up it is, that has been covered in the game's main story, which is something that I gotta give miHoYo props for. Being bold enough to cover such a topic so front and center. Not to mention, Nod-Krai was, for the most part, probably written within the last 2 years or so, right? So yeah, let's just say that the parallels haven't gone unnoticed, to say the least. But beyond that, I also want to talk about Dainsleif a bit, since I do feel that quite a lot of people seem to have misunderstood his role in all this quite a bit. From what I have gathered from the Luna to Archon Quest, I genuinely don't think that Dainsleif was fully aware of what type of work Rerir was doing, which some people are led to believe. Not to mention that he literally admits in the quest itself that he has come to realize that he did in fact know less about Rerir than he thought he did, even commissioning Nefer to help him to figure out more about his former friend. Yes, of course he knew Rerir worked for what's basically the Khaenri'ah CIA, but I don't think that's enough evidence to say that Dain was aware of Rerir's doings, since what Rerir was basically doing was the Khaenri'ah equivalent of MKUltra, so to speak. And yes, whilst it's true that the CIA were behind MKUltra in the real world, not everybody that worked for the CIA worked on MKUltra. I feel this is quite the important thing to bring up, since it's a big implication on Dain to be accused of basically being pro-genocide, right? Especially considering it seems he had already harbored quite negative opinions regarding his king for quite some time before he did his little uprising, right? To save his brother. An uprising that I don't believe he whipped up on the spot, just because of having learned what happened to his brother. Something even Gold Reindotter herself also thought to be the case as well. Not to mention that based on all we have learned about Dain throughout the years, he doesn't really come across as somebody ignorant enough not to realize that the path King Ermin was taking their nation towards wasn't down a pretty one, to say the least. And then again, I could be wrong, there's still so much we don't know about this whole situation, right? But the one thing we do know is that Capitano is still in the based and goated department, seemingly having nothing to do with this entire situation. Though on the completely other side of the spectrum from Capitano, I'd even argue probably as far as one could possibly go, we have King Erminsul himself. And to first address one of the long-standing elephants in the room, we finally got confirmation that the last Khaenri'ah king and the weird as fuck memory tree do in fact share names. And personally, I am really excited about what this might imply for the future. Now secondly, on the other hand, oh boy.
Erminsul. Finster King! How far are you going to take this? From the direct bloodline to secondary offshoots? And then what? Today it's the descendants of the Crimson Moon. Who will it be tomorrow? Will you not rest until everyone down here is dead?
Yeah, what he said. Honestly though, despite there being the equivalent of a massive neon sign pointing straight at King Ermin, indicating that he is probably one of the most evil people on Teyvat, I'm still very excited to learn more about him. What were his goals? What drove him to commit the vile acts that he did? What could compel somebody to do such evil things? It's answers to these questions I'm curious about regarding King Erminsul. This also goes for the remaining sinners, less so what compelled them to become sinners, since we already know it's because of their unquenchable ambition. No, for the thing I'm the most curious about is, what the fuck was going on with Vedderfolnir's voice speaking to the sinners? So, regarding the voice that was speaking to Rerir, I've seen a lot of people think it was just the Abyss mimicking different voices, which very much could be the case. Although, personally, I don't actually think that's what's going on. Knowing miHoYo, I feel it would be too simple if that was the case. Mainly because of how big their love for Evangelion is. No, seriously, they love that show a bit too much probably. But what I actually think is going on is that there's some real timey-wimey bullshit. More precisely, that sinner Vedderfolnir is somehow speaking to the sinners before they became, well, sinners. Basically, to tempt them to the dark side, so to speak. I mean, we already know he's capable of this, since Stain back in the Curry Bear quest was worried that, quote-unquote, he might have seen us, with he, in this case being the, scary talking crystal, that we now know was most likely Vedderfolnir. So yeah, bro most likely exists outside of time itself, which most likely is the case for the other sinners as well, which would make sense, since the sinners should be strong enough to override Celestia's authority, on account of all the times that they've done exactly that. Not to mention, they are literally supposed to be the counterparts to the Shades and the Primordial One. Sortalogi being the counterpart to Void, Gold Reindotter being the counterpart to Life, Rerir and Death, Vedderfolnir and Time, then there's Hiraptatyr being Reason. Yeah, bro is the counterpart to fucking Thanes, which is a plot point I'm really interested in seeing where it's going to go. Also, whilst on this topic, I wonder since Rerir is the counterpart to Death, will Ronova make an appearance later down the line in the Luna Archon Quest? Since the prospects of Rerir not coming back later down the line in the Archon Quest is basically zero. But don't take my word for it. Take Vedderfolnir's instead.
Very well then. My advice to you is as follows. You must persevere. Whatever trials and tribulations you may face, be steadfast in the belief that they are your path to the future. For as long as you live, your story with Thelindis shall not come to an end. That is the only chance you have of fighting back against fate.
Though I suspect this might be later down the line in the quest. I doubt our first weekly boss in like 6.2 or more likely 6.3 will be Rerir, since we already got a story exclusive boss fight with him in this patch. So, in other words, does this mean that it's finally time for Dottore to make his appearance? Look, I am by no means a big shipper, but there's something about Columbina and Sandrone. Man, like, they just exude an insurmountable amount of aura, that being aura of the Yuri variety. But beyond me wanting to see them scissor each other at least once before the end of the Archon Quest, I can't even begin to convey just how much I have ended up liking Columbina as a character. Girl is literally the physical embodiment of nonchalant, not to mention the archon of rage baiting. I don't know, man, I just find her so likable. Look, I know a lot of people were mad that their headcanon about her being some generic analog horror monster didn't come to fruition, which sure would have been pretty cool for Genshin, right? But on the other hand, whatever it is that we have now, it's so much better, in my opinion, of course. But with that said, I'm also very curious about where Columbina's story is going. I don't doubt it's going to at least partially be about her overcoming the shackles placed on her since her birth, but how that will go down, I have no idea. As for Sandrone, well, she didn't really do all that much this patch, except being to Rerir what Team Rocket is to Ash. Grr, Rerir, next time Polonia will certainly come out on top, mark my words, grr. Something like that. Alright, there's also that one retelling of the Fontaine World quest she did at the end, which makes me interested in what the implications about that entail for the future of the Luna Archon Quest. I mean, the Nassenskreuz Ordo logo literally is the same as the Song of the Welking Moon logo. No, I'm not making that up. You can check for yourself. Look at the screen, see. They're similar. Very similar. I'd even argue a bit too similar. But the funniest part is honestly how Sardine went the entire scene without addressing the elephant in the room. That of course being her uncanny resemblance to Marianne. Girl, you ain't hiding shit. Just put the lore drops in the bag and tell me what's going on, okay? But yeah, 6.1 has been fucking great, and I can't wait to see where the story takes us from here. Will Rerir make a comeback next patch, and will I finally find a consistent way to say Rerir's name? I don't think so, but one can dream. What will happen down the line in the story? If he comes back, will it be later down the line in the story? So if we assume that's the case, who's gonna be the antagonist for the time being? Maybe Dottore? Which would also mean that my boy Wanderer is making a comeback? So yeah, there's a lot of different ways the story can go from now on. And that's something I'm really excited to see unfold. And if Amphorius is anything to go by, the Inazuma Archon Quest is far from having reached its peak. Yes, I am one of those people that actually liked Amphorius. Well, the way I said that makes it seem like a lot of people didn't, which isn't really true. Sure, some people on Twitter are very mad about it, and Reddit as well, but then again, Reddit does make you feel like maybe dead internet theory isn't all that bad. But yeah, I think that's about all. Well, all I can come to think of, at least. When a quest is as packed as this one, there are things you are bound to forget bringing up. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.